Hello, I'm Joe Silvera, and we're here in Berkeley, California at the Silvera Jewelry School. Now, you might hear a few hustle and bustle noises of the city behind us as we're working, but that's just part of being in the city. But I'm here today to show you how to make a freeform prong setting that you can use to set almost any kind of stone. Now, this is an excerpt from my book, Soldering Beyond the Basics, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's go over the tools you're going to need to do this project to make this prong setting. So we'll start with the solder tools. You're going to need a torch, of course. So I use a micro butane torch and the butane fuel, which should be premium quality so that it doesn't grease up the works on the torch. You have to have a non-combustible surface so that you can protect the tabletop from the fire of the torch and from the heat going through your soldering surfaces. You want a solder board, so that's where we're actually going to work on, as well as the charcoal block. Flux to keep the metal clean, and your tools for soldering, the pick, brush, and tweezers. And don't forget your safety glasses to protect your eyes. Now let's check out the other tools we'll need. You'll need some basic metalsmithing tools in order to do this project as well. So we have a bench block with a little pad to help deaden the sound, a stamp if you want to decorate some of the parts for your setting, felt pen to make some marks for measurements, etc., a leather scrap so that you can protect the bottom of your setting while you're working on it, a prong pusher, a needle file, ring clamp, V-slot bench pin with a clamp if you're going to attach it to your table, polished hammer, steel one, and a jeweler's saw with a number 2 saw blade. Now let's look at the pliers. You'll need bent nose, a pair of good flush cutters, chain nose, round nose, and flat half round pliers. These are the bits I recommend for polishing your setting. Of course, you'll need a flex shaft or a Dremel to use them. They'll work with either one. If you don't have a flex shaft or a Dremel, you can use 400 grit sandpaper to polish away any scale on your piece. But if you do, you'll want a black silicone polishing wheel and some radials. These are stacked 4 to 6 deep on the mandrels. So this is blue, 400 grit, peach, and light green, which goes up to a mirror polish. And you'll need the screw mandrels to attach those so that you can use them with a flex shaft or Dremel. When it comes to choosing stones for your prong setting, for this style of prong setting, which is a nice simple one, you have a lot of different choices, a lot of variety of things you can set. You can do metal stampings, you can do carved pieces, you can do beads, you can set pieces of glass, found objects, stone, etc. So what's going to make a good piece for you to start with? I would suggest something flat like this piece and with consistent height all the way around. So why is that going to be easier? Well, you have a flat bottom to work against, so you're not trying to balance this on something wobbly, and it's easier to see the base when you form it. And then you have consistent heights all the way around, so all of your prongs can be just about the same exact size. So that will make your first piece much easier to construct. But if this is what you really like, just practice on some simpler pieces first. If you want to do a piece like this shell that has a very different kind of bottom here, it's not flat, it's thicker here and flatter there, and the whole thing's rounded. That's going to take a little bit more fun and time to fit the base to it. The base can't be flat necessarily, so you're going to have to kind of form the base up and to the back, and then you'll have to have different sizes and lengths of prongs to get this to sit. So it might take you a couple of tries to get that right, before you finally settle on a design that really holds it well. And that can be disappointing if it's your first piece. So I suggest starting with something easier like these guys and work your way up to the more fun pieces. Of course, you're going to need some wire and jump rings and some solder to assemble and fabricate this setting. So I used 16 gauge sterling silver wire, round, dead soft, and 18 gauge round sterling silver wire, also dead soft. I used some 18 gauge 4mm inside diameter jump rings, and solder. Now you can use easy, medium, or hard solder for this project. I used easy. By the way, you can tell that this is easy solder for me anyway, because I marked the end of the wire. So the end of the wire is bent once for easy, I bend it twice for medium, and I bend it a third time for hard. So the more bends in the end of the wire, the higher the temperature solder. Do something to your solder so that you know what temperature it is and that it is solder, so you don't mix it up with these, because that would be bad. When you have your piece chosen to design your setting for, what you need to do is figure out how you're going to build the base for the back and where you're going to position the prongs so that they'll come up and over the edge to hold the piece down. So I have an example piece here of one that's done. So if we flip it over, you can see on the back side here that we have our base going around the back, and it closely matches the shape, but it doesn't have to be a perfect match. In fact, if it's a little bit smaller, that's okay too, because it's better for the prongs to kind of come out a little bit and go up and over and around the stone rather than trying to make them go straight up the sides. So we have our piece to set here, and the first thing I did was I traced around it with my pencil so I can get the basic shape of it. The next thing I did on that tracing is I sketched in an idea for the base. So just a simple kind of ovalish shape. And I'll use this as my map for bending the wire in the next step to make that base form. We're going to attach a jump ring, so you want to think about where you want to hang it so that it'll hang nice and even through the middle of the piece. Once you have that sketched in, you can start adding in prongs. So now you're thinking about where are good places to put prongs to capture the stone. So if I put the stone back on top like that, you can see I'm trying to position the prongs where you have like natural notches and indents and stuff on the stone. It's not best to put it on a sharp corner, so I would never put a prong right on that sharp corner right there. But here to the side of that, that's a nice easy place to tuck in a prong and have it stay secure. So when we get the base done and we look at it on the actual stone, then we can figure out how long to cut these prongs. So for right now, we just have our map of what we're going to do, and now we're going to start constructing the setting. To make the base, I'm going to use 16 gauge sterling silver wire. So usually I make the base from a thicker wire, and that will support the thinner prongs. So the prongs are going to be an 18 gauge for this piece. When you start, you want to trim the end of the wire flush. So I'm going to take my flush cutters and do that, and trim it straight across. And when I start to bend it around the drawing, I want to put the join right where the jump ring is going to go. That way all my joins are in the same place, and that just keeps everything else neat and clean. To do my bending, I like to use flat half-round pliers. These make it easy to bend the wire without nicking it up with straighter jaw pliers like chain nose or flat nose. So to get started, what I'll do is grab this and give it a little bit of a bend. It's a little bit easier to start this out like so. And then as soon as possible, I start laying it against the drawing and holding it with the half round jaw on the inside of the curve like that at little key points, and use that leverage to start bending the wire around. So I'm holding it against the drawing and bending. Remember, you're making a shape that goes inside the setting. It doesn't have to be a perfect match. So you have some freedom to change this a little bit after you get it together and soldered. But it just has to sit within the edges of the stone that you're setting. So we're going to pull this around and just kind of get it to settle on the drawing a little bit like that. And then grab the next key point. So I tend to go for like close to the corner like that, and then I'm pulling the wire around like so. Of course, the wire is dead soft to start with, so you're not being challenged by a half-hard springy wire to do this. Okay, now that I have it pretty close, I'm going to mark off where to cut it and bend this into alignment. So I'm going to take it to the bench pin now where I can file it and fix it after I cut it. Trim the wire base to size with your flush cutters. So make sure you make a flush cut on the other side of the join. And then you'll need to fix the join for soldering. You want to make sure that's nice and tight. So first thing we'll do is bring this up and close it with a little bit of tension and see where we're at with the join. And I can see that it's a little bit off there. So what I'm going to do is fix it. So I can either file it or I can saw it. So if I want to saw it, what I'll do is keep the join together and hold it with a ring clamp or your fingers. If you hold it with your fingers, you have to keep it steady. So you actually put it on the bench pin so that it's right down on the wood like that. And then you're going to saw through it, but there's a good chance that that end will go up and down as you're sawing. So another way to do it is to hold it with the ring clamp like this and to put the join in the middle. So I'm just going to grab something to help me grab onto these wires here, like these bent nose. And then I'm going to put that in the middle so I could saw straight to it. In fact, here's an old cut that I can use. This is why ring clamps are cheap, so you can saw into them like that. And sawing it has a really good advantage, and that is that as you're cutting through the join, you're cutting both sides at the same time. So you're kind of evening out both at the same time. Filing, it's easy to round out the joins. So I'm going to hold it like that and grab our saw. I have a size 2 saw blade in here. And I'm going to line it up to the join and just take it nice and slow and saw through it. You can feel when you make it through the metal and to the other side. Then we'll take it out and check the join. And depending on how straight your saw cut was, you should see like a better fit. So let's see how that looks. All right, we've gone in super close to focus on the join so that you can see it. In real life, what I do is I hold this up with a light behind it, like a fluorescent light or a window, so that I can look through the join with one eye closed and see if I see any light. And this one looks pretty good and ready to solder. So now we're going to solder the jump ring and the base shut and then solder those together to make the bottom of our setting. Now if I try to solder the round jump ring to the rounded base, it's not going to have much of a connection. So after closing it with my pliers so that the joint is nice and tight and no light showing through it, I clip or file a flat spot at the joint. That way it's got more area to connect. So I'm going to take the same flush cutters and come in and just take my time and line up on that joint and then clip it straight across like that. So now I can fit that against the setting. So we need to get this ready to solder, so we go through the same basic steps as we always do to solder. So first step is to make sure everything is clean. So they're clean, they're brand new, we've cut all the joins fresh and everything is ready to go. Joins are closed for soldering, so we verified that. We're adding flux on the whole thing so that we protect it from fire scale and kind of minimize our work time to clean it. And laying it down on the charcoal now to solder so that I get a little bit faster soldering. And I've got the base all fluxed on all sides there and ready to go as well. And I'll usually separate those an inch or so apart so I don't overheat one while I'm working on the other. So the next step is the solder. The solder I'm using is easy. This is pretty much your choice which one you want to use. You can use hard, medium, or easy solder for this project because you're going to do all the joins in the same temperature, so whatever you feel more comfortable with. For the speed of the video, we'll use easy. It's the fastest to flow. I like wire solder. It's a little bit easier to be precise with the placement of the solder and not have to guess where it's going to go. Say, for example, when you're using paste solder, which sometimes when the paste burns off and it forms a ball, it's not where you wanted it to be. So I just find wire solder or sheet solder to be a little bit easier to work with. So you only need about 1 millimeter of this stuff to make the joint close. So I'm going to clip that, and one for each join on the separate pieces. and another one for between the two. And one more for the gremlins that might steal it from my table here while I'm working. And each one of those pieces gets a little bit of flux on it, so you might not totally see it on the screen, but what I'm doing is just fluxing each one lightly with the brush. Makes it easier for them to get picked up and moved into position. So we're going to scoop up those pieces of solder using my micro-butane torch for this. Here's our first victim. So we're going to heat him up until it turns into a little ball and scoop it up. We'll do the jump ring first. So we start lightly heating it. The flux turns nice and clear. Then we set the solder on the join. Keep heating until you see the solder flow in like that. And we're going to move that before it has a chance to stick to the charcoal. Set it aside for a second. Bring in our next guy. Scoop up the little ball. Place it on the join. So I'm heating the metal to make the flux go sticky. And when the flux gets sticky enough, it'll take the solder from the pick. So now this is a bigger piece, so I'm going to spend more time heating around the outside, because you have to heat the whole thing up to get the metal hot enough to make the solder flow. And when all the metal looks clean and clear, all the flux is clear, I'm going to take the heat to the join, hold it in the middle there, and get that to flow. If it's being reluctant, then you can just go back and heat it again, but there it goes, right into the join. Right at the tip of the cone on the torch. If you feel like it's a little lumpy, you can go back, heat the rest of the metal that might be drawing the heat away, and come back and hit it again, and there it goes. Good. Now while that's still hot, I'm going to leave it on the charcoal. I'm going to pick up its little friend, the jump ring. We're going to bring this over and start putting this together to solder. You just have to remember about where the middle was for your piece. That looks pretty good. Make sure they're touching. In fact, if you warm it while you're positioning it, the flux will actually go liquid and help to hold the pieces together. And now I'm going to get my last piece of solder and place it on top there. Just want to tuck that into the join. So that flowed onto the jump ring already, but that's okay. I can pull it back to the bigger wire just by heating that up a little bit more. And we'll see it flow back like that. There we go. So those pieces are soldered together now. Going to take them off the charcoal before it sticks. Good. And then I'll take that and pickle it so that I can start positioning and making my prongs to go around it. Well, we were thinking that maybe you didn't see the pick soldering as clearly as you could have, and you were wondering just how exactly did I pick up that little piece of solder onto my pick and put it onto something, say, like the jump ring. So we're going to do a little insert of that here. So starting at the torch, remember that I fluxed the jump ring and I put a little bit of flux on the solder too, so that makes it easier to pick up. And it's right here. You're going to see it as I bring the torch in and it starts to glow and glisten like that. As I pick it up, what I'm doing is pulling the heat back and scooping it up with the pick. So you don't want to try to pick it up while it's molten. It gets more difficult to pick up. So take the heat off of it for a second, just after it glistens, and scoop. And I'm using a titanium solder pick, so the solder won't melt to the pick, it'll just stick to it. So now, to get it to stick to the jump ring, what I do is warm the jump ring up until you see the flux go clear, and then just kind of hover the heat back a little bit till you get it to stick like that. And then heat straight through the middle, nice and even, to draw the solder into the join, like so. There you go. The sample setting we're making for this video has balled ends, like you're balling a head pin, that have been flattened. So you need to do that before you start measuring the prongs for your setting. So I've got my piece of 18 gauge sterling here, cut to about 1 inch, hanging straight down, and I'm going to bring the point of the torch in and heat it up until it balls up like that. And I'll repeat that with each of the wires for the setting. And then these little guys will go to the pickle to get cleaned, and then we'll take them to the bench block to hammer. While our head pins that we're going to flatten to make into prongs are in the pickling, let's talk about measuring the prongs to the right size and how you figure that out. So what I've done is I've taken the other piece that we soldered together after it was pickled, and I'm putting it on the back of the stone temporarily. Now you can tape it down or just hold it in place with your fingers, but one cool trick you can use is you can use this stuff, which is called wicked sticky wax or sticky wax. Any sticky wax, whether it's for positioning stuff, and you can find that at like art supplies, or sculpture wax will do. This is the same wax that jewelers use to tack up little stones and put them in place. But this stuff is so sticky that I can put a little smear of it on the wire and then tack it in place on the stone temporarily, and that stays put. Now, to measure the prong, you can use anything flexible like wire, or like even a tie from a bag of bread, one of those wire ties, and just put it where you want it to go, like that. Sometimes it's even easier to start it on the top like so, where you know a prong is going to go. Kind of put how much you want to stick over the stone, hold that in place, and bend it down to the back of the setting. And then we'll take a felt pen and mark where it joins up. And then we can cut it. And when we straighten that out and measure it against the ruler, we know how long that prong should be. And then what I do is I note that on my drawing with the length in millimeters for each of those prongs. And then I can trim them to size after I flatten them. Now, just a quick note, the reason why we have to be so careful with the size is because we have these fancy ends on our prong setting. So if we didn't ball up the ends first, we could be a little bit more in the moment. We could just make them straight wire, for example, like this one. And as you're bending it down over the piece, you can actually trim it to size and then round over the ends. So that's a little bit easier. But since we're going to be fancy, we got to measure it first. Now I'm going to go get the pieces out of the pickle and hammer them. Hammer the end of each head pin flat on your bench block with a polished hammer. Notice that any little pock marks you might have had in the head pin were hammered out as you worked. Now hammer each one, and then we'll trim them to the size that we measured previously. Another option after you flatten the head pins is to stamp the end of each one with a design. All right, our little prong critter is ready to go on the charcoal block here. Everything's been fluxed, so let me walk you through a little bit of what I did to get here. So of course each one of those prongs was trimmed according to our measurements on the drawing, and I cut the ends flat with a flush cutter, so they're flat to put against the base here. I put the base against the drawing and marked with a Sharpie or a permanent marker exactly where each prong should sit, and that permanent marker will not fade for a while I'm working, so it gives me a while to set things up. As soon as I get closer to solder temperature, those marks will disappear, so that's why you kind of want to set everything up now. So it's fluxed on all sides, it's on the charcoal, and I've got my pieces of easy solder cut and ready to pick up. So let's ball up the first piece. I'm warming the flux first, right? So the flux has to be at the right temperature to tack the solder in place. No use trying to put it on just yet, but as it gets clearer, I can start placing the solder against the wire and let the heat of the metal and the sticky flux grab it from the pick like that. So it's inside that little reddish flux blob right there. So we're going to focus our heat here where these two are coming together. So I'm heating up this whole section after pre-warming the rest of it a bit. And just want to make sure that that actually flows to the base. So it went onto the wire, which is a little bit easier to heat up. Make sure they're touching. And then you can get it to flow back into position. So we'll just heat up back here a little bit more. It must be sucking the heat away, and we are using a smaller flame. There it goes, back into the join between them. You want to make sure it flows really well so that join doesn't break later when you're setting. And we're just going to go around and keep soldering each one in place. There's number 2. The balls of solder can be 1 millimeter or a little bit generous in size. If you use too little solder here and there's still a crack in the joint, it could break. So we'll talk about carefully bending these up into position when we get to that part. But it doesn't matter if you use hard or medium or easy for this step because they're all equally strong. But if you're using a little butane torch, easy solder is going to be the fastest to flow. And once we get this little guy cooking, it gets faster to get the solder to go where you want it to go and to flow. Just never say that while you're soldering because that'll slow it right down. So just get back there. Another option for this, if you wanted to go a little bit faster, is to use the larger butane torch. This is the model with the silver body. So it has a larger flame, so it's going to cover more surface area, and it'll make it easier for you to heat up the base and the little prong you're working on at the same time. Of course, since it's a bigger size flame and a lot more heat going on, you could accidentally melt a prong or two, so you just have to practice with that a little bit. So a little safer with the small guy. Our last one. Remember, make sure it actually flows back onto the base as well, because it's going to want to flow just onto the prong, which is a little bit loose, until it makes that connection. So I'm heating up the thicker wire and watching for the solder to draw back in. If you move too quickly with the torch, this is going to take a while, so you can see I'm just keeping it kind of slow and steady, and I can see the flame getting a little bit smaller. That's why it's taking longer. So if I stop and refuel, this one will go faster. And that's what I'm going to do. I'll just stop, refuel the torch, finish this off, and then it'll go into the pickle. Our little prong critter is back from the pickle, and so you can see the joins have been soldered. I've looked over the whole thing to make sure that they're filled up nicely and there's no gaps. And now we're ready to polish it. So I'm going to take it back to my bench pen. And you have some choices when it comes to polishing. If you don't have a Fordham or a flex shaft or a Dremel, you can use sandpaper. So this is sandpaper from the hardware store, and I would probably use 320 grit and 600 grit just to give it a nice satin shine. And you could also do a little bit of cleanup to get rid of any scale and scratches by filing the edges and stuff like that. And you could tumble it. After you got rid of scratches and any scale, you could put it in a tumbler with mixed stainless steel shot and roll it around in there for about an hour or two. But I am going to use a flex shaft, and I'm going to use just a couple bits to polish this up quickly. So I've got a black silicone polishing wheel, which is nice and rubbery like that. This is the medium grit in that family. And I'm going to use this to go around the ends of the prongs, for example, and to clean up any little gaps or scratches. You don't need to do very much with this one. This is just getting rid of the little defects, kind of pre-polishing before you get to the radials. So this will be good if you also have any little lumps of solder, like there's a little left over right there. But otherwise, it's a pretty strong abrasive, so you don't want to go over everything with it because you'll lose the shape of the wire. Just the little spots that need it. Okay, good enough for that. Maybe a little bit here where the joint is. Now we're going to use the radials, so I'll switch over to that. Remember, when you're using a flex shaft, to wear safety glasses, to tie back loose hair and clothing so that you don't get it wrapped up in the tool, and never bring the tool up to your head when it can be turned on or anywhere near your hair. So what I loaded in here is a blue radial. So there's about a stack of 4 to 6 radials on the screw mandrel here, and this is 400 grit. So I'm going to use this to even out the tone. So you may have noticed that the speed of the motor was much higher with the radials. They do like higher speed. I was on low speed, just the lowest I could go with the black silicone wheel for more control, but the radials work faster with high speed. So this is the peach radial. So this is the second to last one to make a bright mirror finish. So I'm just going to do a little sample section here so you can see the polish happen a little faster. When you're using the radials, also press harder so that you're getting a little more pressure and the bristles are flexing like this. If you don't press hard, then you won't get up to the mirror finish. So let's pop in the green one and see just how bright that will get, and then we'll finish polishing it. For more information about polishing, you can always check out my video here on Beaducation on using polishing tools. So there's a little sample of how polished we'll get the rest of the piece. So I'll finish it off and then we will set our stone. Our piece is polished and we're ready to set it around our stone now. So I'm going to bend these prongs up so that they're pointing upwards, and it's important when you start bending them that you don't bend them right at the joint. If you do, they'll most likely crack. It's just a lot of stress on the joint. So what I usually do is hold it with round nose right at the joint line and then bend using that as like a little brake. So it bends it slightly out and away from the joint like that. You want them to be vertical or just slightly outward so you can fit the stone in and press them in place. So just using standard round nose. Don't press too hard with the round nose or you'll indent your wire. Just use it to hold the wire steady while you make your bend. It's a pretty good catch. Now we're going to bring that up like so. So now we can try and fit our stone in there. So again, you know, if they're sticking out a little bit, that's easier to fit them around it. And they're pretty flexible, so you can drop it in like that. Okay, and now just with your fingers, you can come in and start pressing them around the stone. And this is where you get to decide if you were pretty good with your measurement or not. So some scenarios that can pop up, you know, the prong could be too long. And we made prongs with these little bald ends, so it's not really convenient to trim them at this point like we might with a straight wire. If it's too long, what you could do is trim it, now that you're looking at it, to the right size. Take the stone out, and then you can actually hang it over and come in with the torch and bald just that one again. Repeat hammering it on the block, or like the point of an anvil. To flatten it again, you'll have to pickle it and to clean off the scale and to repeat a little bit of polishing, but then you'll be back to where you are now with setting it. What if it's too short? If it's too short, that's a little bit worse. Not a lot you can do to fix it except to come in and cut that prong off and then solder on a new one. And when you're soldering on a new one, you want to be careful that the other ones don't flow and fall off. So one trick you could do is you can flux the whole thing, and then you can dirty up the joins that you don't want to flow. And it's as simple as painting like yellow ochre gouache paint. That's something you can get at the art supply. And yellow ochre paint gets dirty and burns on, and it will crust over and it'll prevent those solder joints from flowing. So we call it anti-flux. But hopefully you've measured your prongs correctly, and we can proceed with the rest of the setting now. So I set that down so it's nice and flat. It's sitting on leather so that I don't scratch up the bottom. And now I need something to push over the prongs with. Traditionally what you could use is called a prong pusher. This is just a simple tool. It's really inexpensive. It's just a flat bit of steel with a handle. You don't have one of these, you could also use a chopstick, like a wooden chopstick or a plastic chopstick, just especially if it has a nice flat end to it. You can use that to push it down with. If you're worried about the surface of the stone, you can also use the rubber end of an eraser, especially for the final push. We're going to use this prong pusher. I'm going to put it on the back of the prong like that and push it over and down to the stone like that. And the nice thing about these prongs with the ball end is they look pretty anyway if they're on top of the stone. They're part of the design. So as long as they're not too crazy, they'll look fine. And notice that I'm pushing one over like that, all the way down. And then I go to the opposite prong, as far opposite as possible, and push that one down, like that. And we'll finish off with this pair. And there we've set our stone. I hope that you enjoyed this project. Well, I hope you enjoyed this class in making a prong setting that can fit most different kinds of stones. I had a good time teaching it to you, and we hope to see you again here on Beaducation.com.